Hi everyone, this is Dr. Heather Austin Robillard, and this lecture video is the Introduction to Substance Use Disorders. This video will be introducing you to the several components of substance use disorder in the U.S. This includes the rates of use among the different types of substances, as well as the cost to society. And we will briefly talk about some of the history of addictive substances throughout the U.S. history, as well as some important terminology that you need to know if you're going into substance use disorder counseling. The most current research we have right now is actually from 2014, as the data for the 2017 and 2018 has not been completely compiled yet. So for 2014, we've seen that there's 66.9 million tobacco users, and those are broken down into all the different types of tobacco products, with 55.2 million Americans 12 years and older are cigarette smokers, which is actually a little bit lower than the previous years of 2002 to 2013. And then we also have 27 million 12 or older who have used illicit drugs or abused different psychotherapeutic medication within the last month. Non-medical pain reliever has been lower in 2014, except when it comes to heroin use, which in 2014 was higher than the previous years. When it comes to marijuana use, 22.2 million users have used in the last month, with that being 8.4% in the United States. With the most used substance in the United States being alcohol, 139.7 million Americans, which is 52% of the population, have used alcohol in the past month. 60.9 million are binge drinkers, and 16.3 million are actually heavy alcohol users. When it comes to actually determining their diagnosis, which we will talk about a little bit more in the terminology sections, 21.5 million are diagnosed with the substance use disorder, 17 million alcohol use disorders, and 7.1 illicit drug use disorders. Now there are there's about 2 million who are combined alcohol and illicit drug use disorders. Now, when you look at these rates, be sure to critically think about what all this data means. Not just that we haven't compiled the data since 2014, but also if we look at the substance use disorders, those are just people that have reported it, and usually they have to have a little bit of money to be able to report it, or they've gone to jail. So we're missing a larger part of population that hasn't been diagnosed with the substance use disorder. Just some things to think about. One important point for professionals to think about when working with substance use disorders is the cost to society. Now, there's several different types of cost to society, and I've just broken them down a little bit today. The use and abuse of alcohol, illicit drugs, and tobacco ends up costing about $500 billion annually. And this is kind of how it breaks down annually. Treatment costs, which might be intervention, prevention, any of those things, they cost about $166 million. Productivity loss is about $100 billion. Now that's labor participation, mortality cost, fetal alcohol syndrome, social welfare administration, property loss from vehicle accidents, not being able to work because you're either in treatment or recovering from a binger or whatever. Crime is about 61 billion. So that just includes the destruction, the lawyer fees, the housing of the criminals, all of that stuff, probation. And then of course there's other medical costs to society. This includes hepatitis B and C, HIV, tuberculosis, drug exposure to infants. All of this can be a huge cost to our society, which is why treatment is so important. If you can see, treatment was the least amount of money spent on substance use disorders. The history of substance use has changed tremendously in the U.S. Many use of substances have history of using for medical treatment as a way to connect socially with others, and ingredients in popular medication and products like Coca-Cola had once had cocaine as an ingredient in its product. With this, the legality of substances has changed throughout the US. Um, Alcohol is a great example of these changes. The Pilgrims first thought alcohol was a good way to use for religious purposes as well as preventative care. And then through 1800 and 1900, there were several temperance movements as a way to prevent abuse of alcohol, which led to prohibition. After prohibition, alcohol had huge sales tax as a way to penalize those who were using it. There have been several other illicit drugs that have been monitored throughout the US. For example, opiates have been used as pain relievers since early times. And in 1914, Harrison Act was the first time that the government attempted to control the abuse of those medications. And then, of course, we're seeing today that marijuana is being used recreationally and medically, and our legalization is changing due to that. There's about 12 states that currently have it legalized for some recreational purposes, and then there's even more that have some sort of legalization for medical use. Here are all the states currently that have some type of legalization for marijuana. Lastly, the chapter talks about different terminology that you want to know as a substance use counselor. First, an important change that happened recently was that the DSM-5 took out specific types of terms for how we label somebody who uses drugs and alcohol. It used to be very common to label it as misuse, abuse, and dependency. The DSM-5 changed that language when they changed substance abuse and substance dependence. They changed it to just one type, which is substance use disorder. And so it's broken down into the different types of substance you're using. So if you are using alcohol, it's alcohol use disorder. If you're using marijuana, it's marijuana use disorder. And basically, you can be diagnosed with this if you meet at least 2 out of the 11 criteria. And they'll diagnose you with a substance use disorder of mild, moderate, or severe. So this is kind of how they break it out into domains of what the criteria are. So those are just some of the terms to recognize throughout this course. Take a look at the lecture video over the NIDA principles and stages of change for more terms that we'll be using throughout this semester.